This is Doug Kay. I want to let you know that I still have a few openings left for my photography workshops in Cuba in January and March of 2017. If you'd like to join me for cigars, rum, old cars, and the beautiful Cuban people, head on over to dougkay.com/workshops.
Up next on the TWiP network, Doug Kay and I review the Ricoh GR II, a pocket camera for demanding enthusiasts, on All About the Gear. Hello, I'm Gordon Lang in Brighton, and I'm talking with Doug Kay in California. How are you doing today, Doug?
I'm pretty well. I'm getting there. It's early here. These early mornings get me. I'm on coffee cup number 2. Thank you, Gordon. How about yourself?
I'm good. I've had about 45 today already, so I'm good to go. Regular viewers or listeners to All About the Gear will notice a slight difference today. Not least, because I'm sat on my mini Moog sofa. See the keys there? If it was switched on, it would be making a terrible sound. It's a beanbag sofa. But because we decided to switch it around this week, because Doug has got hold of the Ricoh GR II, a fascinating pocket camera for enthusiasts with a fixed lens and a big sensor that I've been very curious about for a long time, but have not personally been able to get a hold of. So the ideal situation has happened. Doug's got hold of it. He's tried it. So this week, I'm going to grill him about it and see how it compares against its major competition, the Fujifilm X70, plus a couple of extra surprises.
Absolutely. Now, yeah, this is a camera, Gordon. The GR2 has been a favorite of street photographers, of which I am one, for many years. The original GR came out about 2 years ago. They updated it to the Mark II just a couple of months ago. But the GR and the GR2, like I said, have been very favorites for street photographers, and I was very curious as to why, because until a few weeks ago, I didn't have my hands on one. And it is, as you say, it's a pocketable camera. It has a large sensor, APS-C, or a crop factor of approximately 1.5. And it puts it in an interesting class, which is small cameras with relatively large sensors. And as you mentioned, the Fujifilm X70 is probably its number one competitor. And I think we'll be bouncing back and forth between them quite a bit. Gordon, you've got your X70 there, right?
Yeah, I have. I've got the silver finish X70, which is a very attractive retro-styled camera. Not without its faults. We've reviewed it before, and we're going to be referring to it. But I'm really interested, as I'm sure anyone watching or listening to this show will be also, how these models compare. I mean, the core premise, as you said, is packing a big sensor into a small body, because typically with a compact camera, you have a tiny sensor in a tiny body. And that's the compromise that you have, bad dynamic range, terrible noise at high sensitivity. So the dream for an enthusiast is to have still a relatively pocketable camera, but to put a big sensor in it. And as you say, it's an APS-C size sensor. It's not even a 1-inch sensor, it's APS-C. So the same size as, a Nikon DX DSLR, a Canon Rebel DSLR, pretty much any, Fujifilm, Sony mirrorless cameras, apart from the full-frame Sonys, obviously. It's a big sensor, isn't it?
It is. And as a street photographer, my favorite camera is probably my Leica Q, which is a full-frame sensor. But all of these cameras, the Leica Q, the X70, here is one in full black. Take the lens cap off here. That's the full black version instead of the retro with silver top. And the Ricoh GR are all using a 28 millimeter equivalent fixed lens. No interchangeable lenses. The relatively, or I say for some people, very wide angle, and 28 millimeters is interesting because even as a street photographer, you come at this expecting maybe a 35. And when you go to a 28, it takes a little getting used to, about a day. That's about how long it takes to get used to it. But they're all, I think, aiming at the same niche, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, so the Ricoh GR II, the Fujifilm X70, lest we forget also the Nikon Coolpix A, all have APS-C size sensors, all have fixed 28mm equivalent lenses with an f2.8 focal ratio. As I recall, the Ricoh and the Fujifilm also share a similar minimum focusing distance of 10 centimeters. So I think perhaps to get this out of the way, before anything else, Doug, how do you find the 28mm equivalent focal length?
I think it's probably ideal for street photography because it forces you to get close. It's not that it's wide angle. It's not the angle of view. It's the fact that you get in close, you get a much more personal kind of shot, and of course you get more depth to your images because by getting close, you're likely to have a fairly strong foreground, maybe a middle ground and a background and so forth. So it takes a bit of getting used to. Not a lot, but it takes a bit. And once you do, I think it's very good. And of course, now that these things are, in this case, 16 megapixels, you do have the ability to crop somewhat. So if you really want the equivalent of a 35, you can work with it that way.
I mean, I was surprised when I shot with the X70. When Fujifilm first talked about it, I really loved the idea of having a body that was smaller than the X100, because the X100 series, I mean, it's quite a hefty camera. It's not fitting in your pocket, unless you've got a giant pocket. So I was really pleased that they managed to produce this smaller body. And as they announce, you know, at these press events, they announce the various specifications. It's coming to the lens. What have they put on it? It has to be a 35, right? Because it always is. If it's fixed, it has to be a 35. And then they say it's a 28. And when I first heard that, I thought, it's a little bit wide. But when I actually went out and shot with the X70, I think I found the same as you, which was it's actually a lot more usable than you think. And have a look at Doug's samples on the All About the Gear page. Have a look at my X70 samples in my review of that camera at cameralabs.com. And you'll see that, you know, we've managed to photograph quite a variety of different things. You know, there's obviously the architectural and landscape shots that you'd expect, but because they can focus fairly close, you can get some quite nice looking macro shots. It's okay for, maybe not so great for pictures of one person at a time, unless it's the full body, but you can go up and get a nice group shot of 2 or 3 people from, you know, like shoulders upwards without too much distortion. To me, it was a lot more flexible than I thought it would be. So I wanted to get that out of the way at the start, that 28mm sounds wide, and it is a fixed focal length, obviously, but it's okay. It's actually okay.
Yeah, you're also going to get, you know, it's hard to get a shallow depth of field at that focal length. It's easy to get a great deal of depth of field or to use a zone focusing technique. So to use most of these cameras, we'll talk about it a bit, but either manual focus or zone focused means you can go out and basically it becomes a point and shoot camera in many ways. And for street photography, where you want something that is very quick, you see something, you want to photograph it quickly because the moment is going to go away right away, it's really a nice way to do it.
So we've talked about lens. I think the next most important thing, now we've got that out of the way, is these cameras are designed to be pocketable, transportable cameras. So are they? I mean, when you just held them up there, they look roughly the same size. Are they, in fact, or does one have a size benefit?
Yeah, that's the interesting thing here. All right, so let me see if I can do this. All right, so here are the 2 cameras. Well, it's really hard to see, isn't it?
No, it looks good. It looks good.
All right, here they are, edge to edge. And what you can see in this angle is that they're almost identical. That the Ricoh is maybe just a hair wider. In terms of height, they're identical, I would say, right? And in terms of thickness is where you get the difference. Let's see if we can do that. How do we do thickness? No. There's thickness, if you will. All right, so what we've got is that the Fuji is slightly thicker.
And do you notice that in your pocket?
You know, you do. And here's the big thing. And this is really an interesting comparison because let me just say right now, the Fujifilm X70 is a camera that by comparison has almost every advantage over the Ricoh, except for 2 things. One is that it's a little bit thicker. And when you're talking about a pants pocket, that can be an issue. And the other is this guy. It has a removable lens cap. And I don't want to put this camera in my pocket without the lens cap because it's going to get scratched and dirty. Therefore, I have this extra thing that I have to carry around. I could glue on a tether to it or something like that. But I'm telling you, as a street photographer, having to lug around this lens cap is a pain in the ass, if I can put it bluntly.
I completely agree. And if you look at it, I'm holding up the silver one for mine. You'll notice it doesn't have any lugs on it at all for you to even thread something on it. I mean, if I ever end up wearing glasses, I'm not going to get the ones which you can hang around your neck. But in the same way, this doesn't have anything that you can tie it, you can tether it onto the body, can you? You have to take it off and then put it somewhere. You put it in your pocket. A lot of people who shoot landscapes or architecture might be thinking, what are these guys going on about? Because this is not a big deal. But in the amount of time it takes you to pull it off and put it in your pocket, that's like 2-3 seconds. In that moment of time, a street moment has gone. Even if you're in a wedding and you're a visible photographer, the moment has gone a lot of the time. You know, the expressions changed, people have moved on, they're talking to someone else. It really does slow it down. So shows how the Ricoh does it. Does it not have a lens cap then?
The Ricoh has sort of the point and shoot style electronic cap. We push the button and this little iris opens up, exposing the lens. And because of that, you don't have that extra piece of hardware to carry around with you. You feel safe with this in your pocket, and the startup time is very good. It's just under a second from the time you fire it up till the time it's fully ready to go.
Whereas when you look at the X70, you've got to factor in the taking off the lens cap and your startup time as well. Again, some people might think that's unfair, but really when you're shooting in real life, you have to take that into consideration. Now, one of the other things that these two cameras have in common is they don't have a viewfinder of any description, do they?
That's correct. So they're both rear LCD. Now, in the case of the Ricoh, again, you're going to say, so what's good about this camera? This camera does not have a touch screen. I wish it did. It does not have a tilting or articulating LCD. I wish it could at least tilt, because getting low and getting high is pretty important in street photography. So it's a plain vanilla fixed LCD. It's very nice. It's very easy to see, but no viewfinder. None of these cameras do. Well, I shouldn't say none, but these two cameras do not have a viewfinder. It has a built-in flash, as does the X70. It has traditional controls in that it's a PASM dial, program mode, aperture priority, shutter priority, manual. The Fuji, of course, has what I call superior control. It's the sort of retro style that all the Fujis have, which are a dedicated aperture ring on the lens, a shutter speed dial, an exposure compensation dial on top, and ISO is relatively easy to get to. On this Ricoh camera, you've got to go sort of the usual way, set it to aperture priority or whatever you like there. A forward wheel that will probably give you shutter depending on your mode, a rear one that'll give you aperture depending on your mode, and so forth. So for people who come from the DSLR world or anything except the Fuji line, these are what's become the standard for controls in most of these cameras.
Now, Doug, is it really a personal preference thing, or is one system superior to the other?
I imagine it's personal preference, but you know, if I look at this camera and I say, okay, I want to go to f4 and shoot at a 250th, there's nothing on this camera that tells me that. I have to say, all right, now wait a minute. Let's see. I want to go to manual mode. Now, is it the front dial that does the aperture, or is it the rear button that does the aperture? I can't remember. And you move it, and then you look on the screen to see what it does, and you have to use the LCD. You cannot set the aperture or the shutter speed without looking at the LCD. If it's bright out or dark out, you can't see that necessarily. Whereas the Fuji, you know, I can, in almost all conditions, I can dial in a shutter speed, I can dial in an aperture, I can go exactly to what I want with this camera. So
you could, of course, power it up with those settings as well.
Yeah.
You could preset an aperture and a shutter speed and power it up in that mode if you like.
So what do you think? I mean, for me, I do prefer the Fuji style control.
It's a really difficult one, especially as for my personal work, I shoot with a Fuji X-T1 or X Pro 2 and an Olympus EM1, and they both use the different systems. And so you've got to kind of get your head around switching between them. I sometimes find the Fuji approach a little frustrating, particularly because I do a lot of long exposure photography. So I'm always finding myself at the long end of the shutter range, you know, where I'm deploying 15, 20, 30 seconds or longer bulb exposures. And on a system where you choose PAS or M and you have a front and a rear dial, you just keep turning the shutter dial effectively until you get to what you want. Whereas on the Fujifilm, you have to kind of turn it to a T mode and then select it, or you can only go so far with that dial. So if you're operating in a kind of more general purpose range, I think the Fujifilm system is better. But if you're operating in a very expanded range, especially on the slow end, maybe the PASM system is better. There's pros and cons to both of them. I mean, as I mentioned, it's nice to be able to preset the Fujifilm to the desired shutter and aperture and just leave it on there. And when you switch it on, there's no surprises. And as you say, with these cameras, you are using the screen is the only other feedback. And on the Ricoh, it's the only way to tell what aperture and shutter you're on. I mean, we should probably mention that both of them do offer optical viewfinder accessories, but they are just like rangefinder views. They don't have any information on them. And they're surprisingly expensive as well.
Yeah, and then you've lost the advantage of being able to put it in your pocket. So I think those accessories would not be very popular with these cameras. My shooting mode with both all the Fuji cameras and with the Leica Q is unusual for me, and maybe for everybody, and that is that I go out with the camera in full automatic mode. I'm in automatic aperture, automatic shutter, automatic ISO. And if I see something that I want to shoot at f5.6, I dial in f5.6, I shoot it, I put it back to auto. If I want to shoot it at 250th or a 500th of a second, I dial that in and I put it back to auto. So I'm always ready for nothing. I'm always ready for the default shot, but I dial in the specific things I like. And that's not an easy thing to do with the camera with the PASM dial. You can throw it into auto mode by dialing in auto, but it's not quite the same, because if you want to go to a particular aperture or a particular shutter speed, you have to then go to the TV, the AV, or the TAV mode on this one. We can talk about that.
You mentioned the screen on the Ricoh was fixed and not touch sensitive. Show me what it does on the X70.
Okay, so on the X70, let's turn it on. You've got a full tilt on the X70. You can go all the way up to selfie mode, which is sort of fun if you're going to either shoot video or you're going to take selfie pictures. It tilts down a bit, right? And as a touch screen, of course, you've got all sorts of possibilities, from focusing to releasing the shutter and so forth.
Now, I have a few friends who are street photographers, and they love using the X70 for a couple of reasons. One of them is that they can have it on a table with the screen angled up, so they can see what's going on, and they can touch the screen to take the picture because it is a touch screen, or touch it to change the focus. And they can do this all very, very, very discreetly. Now, there are, we can discuss the ethics behind street photography, whether you want to be visible or not visible. Personally, I'm not that comfortable with it, but some people do want to be discreet. And the fact is, the articulated screen and the touch sensitivity does give the X70 quite an advantage in a discrete street environment. And it also has an electronic shutter option, which allows it to shoot in complete silence. Whereas, if I understood it correctly, the Ricoh doesn't have an electronic shutter. It's only mechanical shutter.
Yeah, it's very strange. I think the Ricoh's quite quiet. Let me turn it on here and show you.
I mean, yeah, the shutters, they're not loud, are they?
No, it's very quiet. But what's interesting is the other way to do those stealthy shots is to use the Wi-Fi application on an iOS or an Android device. So you can, if you want to be stealthy, you set your camera down and you sit there pretending you're playing solitaire on your phone and you're clicking away taking pictures. What's strange about it is if you turn off all the electronic sounds on the Ricoh and use the remote application, it makes an electronic sound. It purposely makes a shutter sound that's louder than what you selected by default. And I have not been able to find a way to turn that off when using the remote application. So anyway, that's another mode. I want to mention one thing before I forget. You talked about long exposure. There is one thing you'd like about the Ricoh GR, and that is you can dial in exposures up to 5 minutes without having to go. So if you want to do a 2-minute exposure, which you'd have to either do in bulb mode or something like that with another camera, or use some kind of external thing, being able to dial in up to 300 seconds is sort of a nice feature.
Yeah, because of course you can then trigger that with a self-timer, and you're totally hands-free. You don't need any additional accessories. I wish bulb timers were more common on cameras. What is fortunately happening is there's a kind of T mode gaining popularity as well as B, which is like B in that it can basically, it depends how the manufacturers implement it. The way some of them do it is it opens the shutter with one press and closes it with another. You're still going to be wobbling it, but at least you don't have to keep it held. But better still is a bulb timer where you can preset the time. So it's really nice that the Ricoh has that.
Yeah. So let's go a couple of other things on this. I have to look at my notes here because I can't remember anything from even as far as yesterday. Some of the other things they've done. First of all, the camera is very light. Of a number of the cameras here we're going to talk about, it is the lightest. And it feels really good to hold. With the small cameras, I call sort of the pinky mode, and that is you hold it with your little fingers sort of underneath, and then you've got a grip. Hold your camera, your X70, and is that how you normally would use it? Is your finger underneath? Not quite for you. Your pinky's not under there. But the X70 I found is hard to do. You sort of have to pinch it It's not quite as easy to hold, and it's heavier. The X70 is substantially heavier than this. This feels almost like a light toy camera. It's magnesium alloy, but I guess, and sort of a plasticky exterior. I don't know if it's plasticky or not, but it's very lightweight.
Would you say that one has an advantage over the other in terms of build quality? I mean, neither of them are weatherproofed, are they? Do you think either of them are tough? Is one tougher than the other?
The Fujifilm feels like a much more substantial camera. It feels heavy. It feels rugged. The Ricoh almost feels like a toy camera, which is sort of a shock. But I think, in fact, it's as rugged as the Fuji. It just doesn't have the heft or the metallic feel. It feels plasticky. All right. But once you get over the ego aspect of having a camera that doesn't feel solid, you say, wow, it is really nice to have this very lightweight camera that I can, in fact, put into a jeans pocket.
Now, Doug, the lens has got another benefit on the Ricoh, hasn't it, that the Fuji doesn't have. Am I right in understanding it has an ND filter built in?
Yes, it has a built-in ND filter that you can either deploy manually or let the camera decide automatically. It is, I think, a 2-stop ND filter. Is that what it says? Yes.
Yeah, so not huge.
No.
But
but again, if you want to shoot street, if you want to shoot at f2.8 without, even at the higher shutter speeds, this thing is interesting. It'll go up to a 4,000th of a second, but if you're wider than f5.6, it will only go up to a 2,500th of a second. So you can't get the really high shutter speeds at the wide angles. I think this is because of the leaf shutter.
It is the leaf shutter because the same mechanism as being the shutter and the aperture effectively is the same thing opening and closing. Right. I mean, having a built-in ND, I wish the Fuji had a built-in ND, especially for, again, the long exposure stuff I do. As it stands, you have to unscrew a bit on the front and then screw on an optional accessory. I think it's the same as on the X100, and then you can have a filter thread and then you can mount stuff on it. But I wish it had even like a 3-stop built-in ND filter. That's one of the things that's missing on this for me.
Yeah, I do like it because I like to be able to shoot relatively wide open, even on the street. Again, you're not going to get the shallow depth of field that you'd expect from something like an 85 millimeter lens, but it's a nice way to shoot. So it's got that. Like many cameras these days, there's no low pass filter. Fuji's never had one, I think, on their X-Trans sensor, so that's not an issue. So let's go through some of the features again. It's small, it's light. It has a feature that I really like. I haven't seen this on any other camera, Gordon. Maybe you have. Let's say you want to review the images in your camera. And you turn it on, and in this case, the lens opens up and all that. But suppose you just wanted to look at images. This has a playback startup mode. So what I do is I hold down the playback button, and what happens is the thing comes to life without going into shooting mode. So I get just playback, and that's really nice when I want to review images. Have you ever seen that before?
Yeah, that's on quite a few point-and-shoot cameras, but unfortunately, as cameras kind of get bigger and more serious, they tend to have separate on-off switches. If they have on-off buttons, it's easier to implement, but if they have on-off switches, it's a bit harder. So you do see it on some and not on others. I mean, for comparison, it doesn't work on the X70. If you press and hold the play button, nothing happens. I agree that is a great feature, because if you want to review something really quickly, it's nice to be able to do that. Going back to the Wi-Fi remote control, one of the things you mentioned about the funny noise that it makes, I should say, if you are remote controlling with a phone, that does, of course, give you your touch, your fully articulated screen then.
Right.
Because you can move your phone to any position. I wanted to ask you about the Wi-Fi apps for both of them. Do they offer similar functionality?
All right. So the Fuji, I know, the Fuji has a pretty good Wi-Fi app. Sort of, I wouldn't say maybe best of class, but it's up there and it does what you'd expect it to do. Ricoh has done something strange. There are two Wi-Fi apps. One is the kind of app that you would install on a smartphone. It's extremely limited. It's essentially an app that was designed to work with Pentax cameras. For real control, they use a web-based app. All right, so what is this? This is an app that you don't install in your phone. You actually download it from the internet. So what does that mean? That means at some point you got to be connected to the internet, and you install the web app using a URL that you click on. Then you no longer need to be connected to the internet, because the app essentially is, I assume, using JavaScript. And it is using its functions without having to go back to the internet. So what happens is you download you go to that web page, you bookmark it, it's now in your phone. Okay. Now, as usual, you use the Wi-Fi settings in your phone to connect to the camera. And now this web page can talk through the Wi-Fi to the camera and do various things. It's funky. It's scary because you say, wow, what happens if I don't have my internet connection? It continues to work even though you're not connected to the internet. And it has relatively good control. I would say, you have full control of the camera. The layout of the app is not particularly good. The human engineering is not great. It does what you need to do. And if your main purpose is to remotely control the camera, it's fine. But it's a strange way of doing it, and none of us are quite used to it.
But you can easily get images wirelessly onto your phone, though, from it.
Yes, you can. You can download the images. You can literally control everything. And it is what you've got. The interface is very much, if you go around to the dials on the back of the camera, you can say, push this button, rotate that, and it's literally as though you're managing the controls. Regardless of what the functions are, you're literally operating the knobs and buttons remotely. Not a great mobile app. I would give it a definitely second class in terms of mobile apps, but it does work. It's just a little strange.
Could we talk more about response and handling? Because on a camera like this, you want it to be able to respond quickly. We've already talked about the kind of startup time that it's got the built-in lens covers. You don't have to worry about that. What about in terms of autofocusing speed and general response when you're shooting with it?
Yeah, I would say it's very good. You have to go in. There's something called fast autofocus mode. And you have to actually go in and select it. And when you do that, the autofocus speed is about twice as fast as normal. And there's something in the manual that says the disadvantage is that while it's autofocusing, you don't get to see the image. And well, that's not true. So I have yet to figure out, maybe someone will tell us in the comments what the difference is. But fast autofocus does, in fact, focus more quickly. Even without it, it's not bad. I found it to be comparable to the X70. In fast autofocus mode, I would say it's slightly faster. Now, this camera does not have phase detection. It's a contrast-only autofocus system. The X70, I think, has at least some phase detect points on it. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, so it's got the X-Trans 2 sensor. So all Fujifilm bodies that use that, so that was a whole series of them up until recently. They have a little cluster of phase detector points in the middle. And if your action is in the middle, and it falls beneath those points, it'll do a half-decent job at continuous AF. And even though the X70 is a 28mm, and even though it's f2.8, so it's never going to be that challenging. If you do have someone walking towards you, you can track them reasonably effectively with the X70, whereas I think the contrast-based system on the Ricoh may be pretty quick at snapping on, but may not be quite as effective in a continuous environment. But again, how many times are you going to be using a camera like this in a continuous moving environment? I'm not sure whether it's a real advantage of one over the other in that respect. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't think it matters that much. I think this, for example, these cameras all have relatively slow continuous shooting burst rates. This one's a little strange in that it's 4 frames per second when you're shooting JPEGs only. But it's faster, 6 frames per second in RAW mode. I have no idea why. I've read other reviews of the camera. Nobody else knows why either.
Maybe it's got an incredibly slow JPEG processor.
It must be. It must be. That's the only thing you can come up with, right? It can shoot 10 frames of RAW in a burst before the buffer fills up, which is okay. Again, for street photography, I don't shoot in burst mode at all. A lot of street photographers do. 10 frames is probably sufficient for that.
I think the X70 shoots at 8 frames per second, but it has quite a small buffer.
Yeah, I think you're right. The other mode of this is very interesting. It's not the Ricoh GR is not a good camera for manual focusing, in that the controls simply aren't very good. It has what they call a snap focus mode, though, which I like very much. I think it's very unique in some ways, and that is if you put it in snap mode, and you push the shutter release down halfway, like every other camera on the market, it will autofocus, freeze, lock the focus, and then you can take the picture. In snap focus mode, you can preset a focus distance. If you then press the shutter release all the way without pausing at the halfway mark, it will focus at the snap focus distance. So for example, let's say you set it for 2 meters. If I want to do a quick picture and I know in my head that I'm set for 6 feet, 2 meters, I just push the button and everything is going to be sharp at that point. It's very similar to zone focusing, which a lot of street photographers use. Some street photographers will shoot at f11 at 28 millimeter. You'll have almost everything in depth in focus. At f2.8, f4, you might use a zone focusing system. So you focus at the 2 meter mark and everything from about, 1.5 meters to 4 meters is in focus. So this is very similar to that. And I was out on the street using this, and I thought it was really a nice feature. And you can set that to what you want. You can set it to 2 meters. You can set it to 1 meter or 1.5, I think. You can set it for infinity. And that way you can essentially have 2 modes without having to change anything. One is autofocus, one is zone, and it's all a matter of how you push the button.
I like that, and I think it also shows them looking at the target market, which is, street photographers who are going to work in that way. It's really nice to see people not just be led on features or specifications, but actually see how these things are going to be used. I mean, another way that I would use this camera, a feature that's very important to me, which I know the X70 has, we've not covered it yet, is that you can charge the camera over USB, which to me is very important in every camera. I want it in every camera, or at least the option. On a travel camera, pocket camera, I think it's even more important. How do you recharge the Ricoh? Is it with an external unit, or will it do it over USB?
It does not come with an external unit at all. It's USB only. You can buy a third-party charger. Actually, you can buy a Ricoh charger if you want to. The battery life, as in most cameras this size, is relatively poor. It's rated at about 320 shots. I can burn through that in a couple of hours doing street photography. So I would suggest getting some aftermarket batteries and adding them to this. The batteries I think are about 1,200 milliamp hours. You can buy third-party batteries that are 1,400 milliamp hours. So you can actually get a third-party battery that'll give you more shooting time than the Ricoh battery. But anyway, yeah, charges from the USB. In fact, they come with a remarkably nice short USB cable. Now,
well, the length is very important. It's as in so many things. It's all about the length.
It is.
It's of critical importance.
But the girth matters as well, Gordon.
It does. And the whole the USB cable is very. But one USB cable may look like another USB cable, but believe it or not, they can really affect how much charge you can get over it, how effectively they work. I mean, if I was in my old job on the computer magazines, I would be testing USB cables right now and saying this is the best one, because it really does make a difference. It's quite amazing when you look into it.
Yeah, one thing to watch out for though, this does not use the usual. It says a little port on the side, and it doesn't use the usual sort of mini USB connector. It uses, I think it's called the micro USB connector. And it's not nearly as common. So if you're heading out for a trip and you just grab a bunch of USB cables thinking you're going to be okay, you've got to make sure to take either their cable or one that's similar that uses that ultra small USB port. Otherwise, you'll get out there and you say, uh-oh, I can't recharge my camera.
Yeah, that's really annoying. Hey, Are we ready to talk about image quality yet?
Let's do that, because, so far I've managed to tell you how much I love the camera and how desperately inferior it is to the X70. However, I went out and shot with both of them the other day. This one, the X70, I borrowed from a friend, and I shot the exact same things and sort of A-B'd them. I looked at them closely. The Ricoh has an extremely sharp lens. It is sharp all the way to the corners. It is sharp, wide open at f2.8. It is contrasty. The images are bright. It is one of the best best lenses I've seen almost on any camera. And I think this is why, one of the reasons this is such a popular street camera. So image quality is superb. When I shot outside and I looked at the JPEGs, I expected the Fujifilm to be really good, because of course we love the look of the sensor. We love the out-of-camera JPEGs from the Fuji, some of the very best out there. The film simulations are terrific if you want to play with those. Ricoh has some. The film simulations are definitely inferior to the X70. Another problem but when I went out and I shot using automatic white balance, JPEG mode, and I went out and shot exteriors. The colors were essentially the same. I shot bright flowers. I shot in shadows. The quality was surprisingly similar. I looked very deep. Dynamic range is a little bit better on the Ricoh. Not by a lot, but a little better shadow detail. Better at higher ISOs, actually, than the Fuji, I would say. I shot all the way up to 3200 with very good results. When I went in to shoot interiors, particularly under incandescent lights, the color out of the Ricoh is not good. I could never successfully get a JPEG that looked good with tungsten light. The Fuji I had no problem with. So that was an interesting comparison.
So if you shot in RAW, though, on the Ricoh, could you manage the white balance better and come up with
it? It wasn't easy. I thought I would be able to. Of course, you bring it into Lightroom, let's say, your RAW file, and when you bring a Fuji image into Lightroom and you go down to the camera calibration tab, you see all the different film emulations that the camera itself has, and you can select them, and I think they look quite close. So if you go for the chrome look, I think it's what's that setting called?
Classic chrome.
Classic chrome.
That's the kind of slightly subdued retro colors. It's really nice.
Yeah, and it looks, what you get using Lightroom and what you get using the JPEG in camera, quite similar. When you bring in a RAW file from the GR II, you have only two choices: the Adobe default and what they call the embedded profile. The embedded profile essentially copies the JPEG, same processing or similar processing to the JPEG. So that doesn't help you because the best you get is the JPEG problem. You can go in and adjust the white balance, using the eyedropper tool, various schemes. You could shoot a color chart if you wanted to, something a street photographer would never do. But the fact is that it takes a lot more work to get a good tungsten or let's say most indoor shots with the Ricoh. The Fujis are just always beautiful.
Did you shoot in the black and white simulations at all on either camera?
I did. I used them all, or I should say I used multiple black and white shootings. Black and white is an area, again, where the Ricoh is gorgeous. Again, because it is so sharp, because you have the ability to make it so bright and contrasty if you want. The dynamic range is slightly better, as I said, I believe, than compared to the Fuji. It is a terrific camera for shooting black and white, regardless of whether you do it in camera with the JPEG or you do the RAW file, shoot RAW, and then convert it later on. So it is a gorgeous black and white camera. I would put the Ricoh clearly ahead of the Fuji in terms of black and white. In terms of color, I would say the Ricoh is as good under outdoor light. It is weaker under indoor light.
That's really interesting to hear that, and I've heard it from other people as well. And there's this assumption that because Fujifilm's processing is famously so good that it's always going to be ahead in this regard. But I've heard before and again from you that the black and white simulation on the Ricoh looks nicer. It's really interesting to hear that the Ricoh lens is sharper. Certainly my own experience with the X70 is that while Fujifilm's optics on every other lens and camera that they do has been very sharp, I feel that they compromised it a little bit, the quality on the X70, to achieve this form factor, and it's a bit softer towards the edges than you'd hope, but it sounds like Ricoh has managed to overcome that. And that, again, the only real benefit in terms of image quality that the Fuji has, as you say, is kind of in managing the white balance and the color processing under indoor artificial lighting. So I think overall, for most people, unless you're shooting events in color, then, events indoors, then it sounds like the Ricoh might have the edge on image quality then. It does.
And again, there are so many things that are as important as image quality, especially to a street photographer. I would say most street photographers are a little bit less fussy about the sharpness of their images. You can be, but at least you have the choice of having a really sharp image with this camera. So let's score 1 for the Ricoh in terms of image quality, although, as we've discussed so much already, ergonomically, except for the pants pocket issue and the weight, the X70 is an awfully good camera.
So how useful to you is having the tilting touchscreen? Because that, to me, is one of the major benefits of the Fuji X70, plus its controls. So having the shutter dial, the aperture dial, the tilting touchscreen, do they outweigh the benefits of the Ricoh, which sound like better image quality, the lens cover that you don't have a cap that needs to be pulled off?
Yeah, this is the ultimate thing, right? The Fuji has everything I would like in a camera. It's small. I love the tilt screen. I love the touch. I love the controls. It's better in almost every regard, except that I don't think I can carry this around in a pocket. And for the mode I'm used to shooting in, that's important because I will typically go out. I mean, even when I go to Cuba, I will take the Leica Q and one other smaller camera because I want to go out in the evening, go out to dinner, but I always want to have a camera with me, so I'll put something into my pants pocket. In the past, it's been my Sony RX100, Mark III or Mark IV in this case. But I can tell our audience right now, I have purchased this Ricoh GR II for myself, which we don't usually do on these shows. We don't end up actually buying a camera, but this camera...
Let me tell you, dear viewer or listener, when the journalist buys the product, there is no greater recommendation.
Right. I'm not just a reviewer, I'm also a customer. But this is a camera now that I think is more likely to go out with me than even the Sony.
Well, let's talk.
And I want to answer that question though you said, which is the tilt screen and all that. Remember, my Leica doesn't have, it has touch, but it doesn't have tilt. So although I love the tilting screen for shooting down low and shooting up high in particular, and I wish this camera had it, on balance, this is still a better camera for me. And this camera comes down to the image quality and the fact that it is easily pocketable. Those are the big things.
Definitely. Now, so far, we've really made this a two-horse race between the X70 and the Ricoh, both 28mm fixed APS-C products. Of course, there's the Coolpix A, which no one ever talks about, even though it's quite good. But there are alternatives. If you would like a zoom lens, you held it up earlier, Doug. What other alternatives for enthusiasts who want a bigger than normal sensor in a pocket package? What have we got?
This is also a camera that I own. This is the Sony RX100 4th generation Mark IV. Marvelous little camera. I should mention a couple of things. We didn't mention how much this cost, by the way. The Ricoh is $620 US, probably getting more and more expensive with the falling pound in the UK by the day. That's a story for another show, I guess.
It's very topical. Doug has dated the show now. The evergreen values have gone.
Yes, we should say this is a post-Brexit show.
We haven't Brexited yet.
You haven't Brexited yet, but you've had the vote.
I thought Brexit first.
Yeah. So we've got, anyway, $620 US for the Ricoh GR II. You can still buy the old GR for a little bit less, only $30 less US. So not much point. And the only difference I should say really is the Wi-Fi. The other camera did not have Wi-Fi at all. If that's important to you, then in any case, get the GR2. Why not? It's only $30 more. So this little Sony, we talked about the X70 so much. The X70 is $700 US, so it's only $80 more. Not bad if that's the camera you want. Price is certainly not the differentiator. This little Sony is getting up there. This is almost $948 US, so this costs more. And as you said, this camera, I still refer to it as my 24-70 in a pocket. So the beauty of this is you fire it up, the lens comes out, and now I have the equivalent of a 24-70 millimeter lens that is f1.8 at the wide angle to f2.8 at the longest focal length. It even has, which for me is really nice, it has a pop-up electronic viewfinder. It's a two-step operation. You push, you can see that. You go like this and you push the button and see how well it works? Push it up and then you have to pull it out so that it focuses properly. But you do have a little teeny electronic viewfinder, which is quite good given its size.
Does the screen tilt?
The screen tilts. It tilts all the way up as we showed for the
But it's not touch sensitive.
It is not touch sensitive. Great little camera, but... And I've had some very successful images with this. I've won awards with images from this little camera. But when you compare the images side by side to the Ricoh's images are vastly superior in terms of sharpness, which, it took me by surprise because we're so used to how good this little guy is. But let's remember, this sensor is a fraction of the size, right?
Yeah. Now, the interesting two things to note about the Sony is they do a cheaper version, the Mark III, that still has the same lens, the same tilting screen, the same viewfinder. The only thing it loses are some slow motion video and 4K video modes. If you're willing to sacrifice those, you can hit a lower price point with the RX100 Mark III. For me, the interesting thing is looking at the sensor size. Now, the Sony RX100 series, like the Canon PowerShot G series, apart from one model, all standardized on this 1-inch sensor, which is smaller than APS-C, quite comfortably smaller. But most of those cameras are coupled with brighter lenses. Now, if you zoom the Sony RX100 to 28mm equivalent, so it's matching the field of view, and forget the fact that it can also go a bit wider and a lot longer, just put that aside, although it is useful. Put it to 28mm, its focal ratio closes to f2, so it's one stop faster than the Fuji and the Ricoh at f2.8. That would allow you to shoot at, say, 200 ISO instead of 400 ISO under the same light, the same shutter. So if you are flexible enough to exploit that brighter lens, which you can in some situations, then that can actually nullify the fact that it's got a smaller sensor. So it's very important to look at both of these things. You know, you could say, but my camera's got this massive sensor, and you could say, yeah, but it's got an f8 lens, for example. And then you've got to shoot at 3200 ISO, whereas you could have this camera with a small sensor, but it's got a very bright lens, which lets you shoot at a low ISO. And they begin to balance out more. But having come out with that big theoretical statement, you've just trumped it by saying the bottom line is that the pictures you took with the Ricoh look better, which is the bottom line. Yeah,
there are a couple of things there. I think if you do the arithmetic on it, you find that the sensor itself is about 1/3. The sensor in the Sony is 1/3 the size and area of an APS-C. The actual size of the pixels, now remember, I think this is a 24 megapixel camera.
20.
Okay, yes, 20. Yep. That's right. But the pixel size is about 1/4 the area. So one could say that all other things being equal, sensor technology and so forth, that this will capture 2 stops less light at each pixel site. Okay, so 1 stop is the equivalent of what you just explained, which is that you can shoot 1 stop wider and get more light that way, but there's still that extra stop. So, you know, it's close, but the fact is that you go out there and if you shoot at 1600 or 3200 ISO, you will see the difference in particular. You'll see more noise on the Sony than you do on the Ricoh. The Ricoh is very clean at 1600 and quite good at 3200. And I should mention that they have 2 different modes that I've used in manual exposure. You know, I'm a big fan of auto ISO. If you set the limit to something reasonable and you go out and you say, I want a particular aperture, I want a particular shutter speed because of what I'm shooting, let the ISO go where it wants to. That's usually fine. If you shoot in full manual, some cameras force the ISO to manual as well. They won't let you use auto ISO in manual. Some will allow that. This one you distinguish in the dial. You have 2 modes. The manual mode fixes the ISO. It's not auto, but this mode called TAV is shutter speed, aperture, priority both, and it allows you to go into auto ISO and full manual on everything else. So anyway, that varies camera to camera. So other points about this, you know, I love the little Sony. Until now, it's been my second camera when I go out for street photography, but I'm about to switch and hopefully stay with the GR2.
That's interesting. Just while we were wrapping that up, Doug, I just tested it on the X70, and you do also have auto ISO in manual. I use it all the time. I love auto ISO in manual. I use it a lot for action photography as well. You know, like when I'm shooting the cycling at the Tour de France, I put it on the shutter speed that I want, so it'll freeze the action. I put it at the aperture that I want because I want a nice shallow depth of field, and I say, right, you worry about the changing lighting conditions with the auto ISO. I don't care. You fix it, and it works really well. So it's nice to see a camera that implements it well. Some of them even go more sophisticated on the interchangeable lens cameras, taking focal length into account and other factors, setting upper and lower limits. But it's a good feature to check out if you've not done it before. So are there any other options?
Well, another thing that's interesting about them is, so the Sony is smaller than the Ricoh GR, but it's quite a bit heavier. And again, this comes back to the fact that this Ricoh is super light, feels better in the hand than either the X70 or the RX100. it's sort of a shock because it's almost like a toy camera. You can go out with this little thing and people think you have a point and shoot and they don't take you seriously. And sometimes as a street photographer, it's very nice for people to think that, oh, he's just got a toy camera. He's not causing any trouble here. So it's a nice thing. So it's heavier, noisier. I'm talking about the RX100 here. It's a little slow to start up again because of this lens extension thing. So when you push the button, it has to come out, go through all that. It takes quite a bit longer. I would say about 1.5 seconds to start up, as opposed to this, which is just under a second or so. And
what about the video, Doug? Though, what about the video?
Yeah, no comparison. The Ricoh is 1080p at only 30 frames a second max, and of course the Sony is 4K video. And so if video is important to you, the Ricoh is not your camera. It's just that simple. It'll do the 1080p. It does a fine job of it. But, these days 1080p 30 is relatively wimpy in terms of specifications, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, the Sony is amazing, the capabilities that they put in there. But even that said, some cameras do 1080 better than others. The X70 does 1080, but on the X-Trans 2 sensor, it didn't do a very, very good job at it. The X-Trans 3 sensor, which they've begun to deploy now, is doing a better job at video. So hopefully we'll see that on other models. But definitely, Sony's the way to go if you want video. Yeah,
and the X70 will go to 60 frames a second. That's the one advantage it has, even though it's only 1080p. But as we wrap this up, if the goal is to go out and do primarily street photography, because that is the main purpose of this camera. This is a carry it with you every camera. Carry it with you everywhere camera. If you want a camera that fits in your pocket, that has the equivalent of a 28 millimeter lens, that takes great pictures. I love this GR II. As I said, I bought it. But what about this? This is an iPhone 6 Plus. It doesn't have to be an iPhone. It could be an Android phone device. But this camera is free. I've already bought the phone. This camera is with me even more often than my Ricoh is going to be. It has a very small sensor, but these things take amazingly good pictures. So I think as street photographers, we do have to ask ourselves, do we really need anything other than a good mobile device? What do you think?
Well, but I'll throw that straight back at you. I mean, why would you carry... I ask myself this all the time. Why am I carrying around all this gear? When you go to popular tourist locations, you're stood at the rim of the Grand Canyon, you're at the Trevi Fountain in Rome, and you've got out your big camera, everyone else is snapping with their phones, and you think, oh, are my pictures demonstrably better than theirs? Am I able to achieve an effect that they cannot? In some situations, yeah. I mean, I got into long exposure photography with filters, tripods, all of that business. That's pretty specialist stuff. That's quite hard to achieve with a phone, although you could probably go some way. But if you're taking daylight snaps, and if you're using a fixed focal length camera, they're not very good in low light phones, but in good light, they're surprisingly good. I mean, my Galaxy S7, I think the S6 before it as well, has optical stabilization. That's becoming more common in phones now. They are producing very good results. So you have to think, is this camera, this other camera, this bigger camera, the heavier one, is it giving me something else? I mean, we looked at the Sony RX100 there. Of course, it's giving you a viewfinder and a zoom lens. With the Ricoh and the Fuji, you don't have a viewfinder. It's a screen only. Of course, the phone has got a bigger screen. They're all touch sensitive. They both have fixed lenses. So you tell me, Doug, if you're shooting with a fixed lens without a viewfinder, what is the benefit?
For me, it is the ease with which I can control the camera. The built-in camera app on the iPhone doesn't give me a lot of control over the camera, but you can buy third-party apps for a few dollars that will allow you to select the shutter speed, the aperture, and so forth. But to me, it's the form factor, it's the controllability. Again, going back the other way, though, in iOS 10, which is coming out in just a couple of months after this recording, you can get raw images out of iPhones. And I imagine,
and you've been able to do that with Android for a while now.
Yeah, for quite a while. So, I think I'm going to leave that to our listeners and viewers to decide for themselves. But I think it's an important question before you go out and spend $620 US, or who knows how many pounds sterling for a camera like this.
At least $1 million.
Yeah. So, you should ask yourself that question. And I think everybody who hasn't done this needs to take their mobile phone out and use it as a camera for a couple of days and see how well they do, because I did that one day recently and used it exclusively for street photography. One of the things I do is composite images, where I take multiple photographs handheld and combine them in Photoshop. And again, in daylight, in bright light, mobile phone cameras are excellent. As you go into lower light, you see the problems, but you need to ask yourself that question, I think.
But you asked yourself, and you bought the Ricoh nonetheless.
Yeah, but I have gear acquisition syndrome, so what can I say? I do like it. We'll see. Check back with me in a couple of months after I've been carrying it around.
We will.
Let me just see. Is there anything else we missed? No, I think we covered it pretty well. We've talked about how much it costs. And the fact is, I own a Ricoh. I don't own a Fuji.
You should have said that at the beginning. We could have saved a lot of time.
We could.
I enjoyed that, Doug. Did you like the role reversal?
I did, except you know what? This side's much harder, because on this side of the camera, you've got to know what you're talking about. When you ask the questions, you do very well because you do know what you're talking about, but sometimes I can ask you questions about cameras and have almost no idea what the answers are going to be.
Again, I just make it up and hope I don't get caught out.
Yeah. Oh, we can fix it in the comments, can't we?
Exactly.
All right. Gordon, I'm going to say thank you very much for being the Doug this time. I've been the Gordon. It's been another great episode. Again, Gordon, I don't think you have a review of the GR2 on cameralabs.com, but for everything else we do here on All About the Gear, please go to cameralabs.com, read Gordon's detailed reviews, and of course, click on the Buy Now buttons. And we will see you all next time on All About the Gear. Thanks, Gordon.
Thanks, Doug. See you later.
All right. Bye-bye.